Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to the Tread a Path podcast from Kufi Productions, where we explore the inspiring journeys of Muslim professionals across diverse industries. I'm your host, Salman Hasan, and each week we sit down with remarkable individuals who are making their mark in their chosen fields. We highlight their successes and their challenges in their journey, examine corporate accountability within the industry, and how they offer any actionable advice on career advancement and ethical navigation to those who want to tread their path. As a reminder to our listeners, you can find the show notes, resources, and ways to connect with our guest speakers in the Tread a Path archive, which is in cookieproductions.com. Today, I'm honored to be joined by Kamla Tung, Director of International Communications and Marketing, and she worked 10 years in China within the field of education and in coordination with various institutions. Kamla, assalamu alaikum. Thanks so much for joining us.
Walaikum salam. Happy to join.
Yeah, before we dive into your story, can you give us a little bit of a brief description of what you do currently in your capacity?
Sure. So my name is Kamla, and I'm currently working as Director of International Communications and Marketing over at ASU, which means really we work with the enrollment side of things, admissions, to speak to our international students and parents. And that's pretty much what I do at the moment.
Nice, nice. No, that's wonderful. So you work with a lot of students, you engage with them, and there's a lot of guidance and a bit of hand holding, I guess, in a sense. Right? And so, what initially drew you to that field? What was so captivating about it that you wanted to work in that industry?
I'm probably not someone that knew what they were going to do. I thought I knew what I was going to do when I was 10. I know less and less what I'm going to do as I get older. So what drew me to this particular field, I feel like, is sort of serendipity, if you will, right? So it's like, I came through mostly because I like people. I studied a certain particular major. I was in communications in undergrad, and then I decided to switch and went to poli sci because of one class in undergrad. Went poli sci, and then I realized the field was majority things that I really disliked, and there was a tiny part of the field that I really loved, which is this critical theory area. And then moved on past that. And so after that, I moved straight to China. And so part of that was, a lot of the availabilities in the city that I was in was very limited, and it was mostly education. And so I sort of came full circle back to, originally dreaming as a 10-year-old of being like a teacher and ending up as a teacher, realizing I enjoyed teaching to some degree, but it wasn't necessarily the teaching. It's more of the being able to connect
Sure.
with people, right?
Right.
And so I did administrative roles and then, multiple different sort of teaching opportunities, and also worked with, high schools, kindergartens, and middle schools everywhere in between. And so eventually ended up back in communications, hilariously enough, after taking a whole, route around. So that's sort of what came out.
Sure.
But I think the main thing for me is really the people at the end of the day. It's being able to communicate to people ideally using the way that they like to listen to and hoping to be able to connect with them, when they don't know who is on the other side.
That's a wonderful and it's an amazing story because a lot of people like to work with other people and being able to serve in whichever capacity that they wish to serve in. And yours is unique in the sense that not only you went kind of like full circle, but like you went to a whole different country, to practice what you want to do, practice, and then get to the point where you are. So we'll dive in more into that later on in our discussion. But let's start from the beginning and talk about your early influences that shaped your career aspirations, right? So, what, I guess, like from college, right? What decisions did you make, or like who were your inspirations, if you will, to help kind of shape the path that You're in right now,
I would say go even further back. Hold on one second, I'm sorry.
or further back? Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. However far back you want
yeah,
to go.
I know. I was like, to go further back, I started off in high school, I guess you could say. I had a really influential, teacher, Mr. Shah. I don't know if he'll be watching this eventually. Loved him. He was one of the best, teachers. Him and then one other English teacher, Miss Freeman, and they really influenced me in terms of trying to think critically about a lot of things. And we were a really small school, right? It was a Islamic school. Most of you guys know it. It's ACA, whoever lives in Phoenix. It was one of the
Yes.
one of two. We were sort of like half rivals with the other one. Uh, anyway, but yeah, so went there, and then I think the way they thought about a lot of things, like contributing back to community. Mr. Shaw was really big on like giving back to community, going to see different parts of the city that you would normally never see. Because your parents, you have a sort of rhythm in your life, and you don't normally break it. And so he was the type of person who would like take us to St. Vincent de Paul. He would take us to the Ronald McDonald House, or work with a bunch of interfaith places. So Baha'i faith, the some of the Christian churches nearby. We'd go meet some of the neighbors who lived around ACA, and they hated us at the time. And so because we always had the band like blaring over the loudspeaker. Anyway, so we had
Sure.
to do a lot of relationship building. But yeah, so he was basically, he was really into sort of getting us around into the community and making sure that we were involved with everybody. It got me into thinking about how I can give back. And so we also had a lot of students at the time who were refugees, and we had a couple of kids who were from Sudan, a couple of kids who were from Somalia. And then in that method of tutoring, I was the free tutor, right? And so to get them to connect with things, it was interesting to sort of see what was the disconnect between what was happening in the classroom, the teacher and the student being able to understand and what was missing in between. So these little pieces made me think at the time, I was like, oh, I love being a teacher. And then, that's sort of where it all started, just talking to people. But I think as I got older, when I went to college, I was involved in MSA and I was involved with a couple of other organizations. And then I did a study abroad 1 year in the third year of my college career to China and went to Nanjing University, which is one of the top 5 or top 10, depending on the year you're looking at rankings in China.
Yeah.
And so, I was 15 when I started college. So when I went to China, I was like 17. And before then, I was really living in a very insular, almost 90%, like probably 99% like Muslim community kind of situation. And, as I grew older, I realized it was more of a very small community. And so I didn't really have a whole lot of friends in the non-Muslim area after I was 10. And so, being able to open my eyes and I was forced to really sort of get along with, not get along, but like get to know people, right?
Yeah.
And so during that journey, that whole area, I think I realized, you know, connecting to people from different areas of life was really, really important to me. And after I came back from China, that sort of like changed my. Also, it's really interesting because it was like the top 5 university in China, but at the same time, the education felt like to me it was really, really bad. The teachers would just sort of talk out of textbooks. They weren't teaching; they were there to sort of waste time, and so they wouldn't even take attendance. They didn't care if you were there. And then so when I came back, I was like, I feel like I wasted an entire year of my education. So I came back and I like took over credits, overloads, and then I took a poli sci course. And then this one teacher, he was a PhD student at ASU from Mexico, I think. Really, really brilliant guy and also extremely long winded, but such a brilliant person. And every time I'd write a paper, I would really, really want him to like my paper. And every time I sent in a paper, I remember just feeling like so excited to get like, or not excited, I was more anxious, I guess, worried that I would disappoint him. And so that kind of stuff, like, anyway, I feel like I'm sorry, I'm totally going off the rails here. But these sort of things I think really made me realize, like, and then he was teaching a class about politics, which had been recommended to me by another classmate from my old Islamic school. And so I thought, all this love of this, learning about critical theory and all these way that you could rethink the world for different viewpoints was really important to me. And I was like, oh, I want to learn this when I was after grad school. Because at that point, I was in my 4th year of college and I felt like I was graduating knowing nothing. And I had no idea what skills I was going to use to put where and what career I wanted at that point.
Sure. Yeah.
And so, after that class and I finished, I got an A. The teacher had a lot to like both, praise me and also be like, this is what you need to focus on. And I love that. And so I ended up applying to grad school for politics, took a gap year, I worked in between as an elementary school teacher to save money. I ended up would have saved more money if I went the first year, whatever, everything's God's plans. And so I went the second year and then did a whole 2-year program at UCSD in politics. And I thought the whole time that, I'm sorry, Salma, I'm so sorry for breaking this. I'm
Yeah.
sorry, I'm gonna
No,
have to take
take
this one.
take the
Okay, give me 1 second. This is the most stressful life. Okay, sorry.
no problem. No problem.
Sorry, I totally
So
derailed. Go
you
on.
no, you were saying about your poli sci experience. Like you took a 2 year gap, and I'm curious about what happened there. Like why did you? I think you were explaining why you decided to take a gap in your education journey,
Yeah,
right? And you went into poli sci. And so I guess what I want to ask here, because I'm glad you brought all these different points of your life, and this different points of your professional journey, because it's not one a it's not linear, right? It doesn't follow. It's not supposed to follow a certain blueprint, right, as far as careers go, right? And then secondly, inspirations can come from you know anywhere or any part of the world, right? And any you know from places that you least expect too, right? So, and in that sense, also challenges could be is often the same thing, or follows the same patterns as well. So, what challenges did you face, growing up, or like in your education, and even post graduation, right? Like, how did how did you come? Oh, and also, how did you overcome those challenges to get to the point that you are now?
yeah. Um, Yeah, sorry, now that I'm not distracted anymore. I feel like he was trying to find a place to park and he couldn't find a place to park, and I was like, "Don't
Yeah,
park there."
sure.
But, one of the things that, like, I think was the constant piece that was, like, consistent throughout all my phases of life, I think, was this idea of having to explain myself and sort of bridge a lot of gaps, right? And so I'm Chinese American Muslim. I was born Chinese American Muslim. A lot of people think I was converted, but no, our family has been Muslim for many generations because there's a lot of Muslims in China, long other history. But so
Yes,
growing up, I
yes.
remember like, I mean, all the kids around me, I didn't really pay too much attention, but all the kids around me were white because I grew up in North Phoenix, and then maybe a couple of the Mexican kids, right? And then we had like, we were in a
Right.
specific neighborhood where there were a lot of immigrants. There was a Ukrainian, there was a German, and there was like a Bosnian. And so, but these things were like, in the back of my mind, I often saw how, it wasn't an issue to me until I remember I was 7 years old. And then, one of my friends would make fun of me for having a flat nose. I wasn't hurt, to be honest. I didn't have realized it was meant to be an insult. I considered her a friend. All these things that would happen throughout time. And it slowly started to, so my style of conflict resolution a lot of the time was always about like explaining, trying to understand why they would say something and trying to let them understand why, I am the way I am or why I do things the way I do, but never trying to impose my things on them. And this again happened in high school when I had, my teachers like Mr. Shaw or Miss Freeman. And, when we went out to do all these like interfaith things, my mom was big into like getting involved with the community. She would throw us in choir, which I hated for all of my youth. And now you're like, oh, I guess it helps a little bit. But at the time, and so we go and do these like interface situations, and you'd meet all these kids from other different faiths. And at the time I was very shy as well. I was always a very shy kid, very introverted. So, meeting people from different faiths forces you to confront things. Oh, what are the things that are similar and why do they do things differently? And what's the sort of logic behind that? And then, when we would go attend at one point in high school, I think, remember we did one where we were going to a Jewish synagogue. And I remember that one's a little more tense because I forgot what had happened, but it was not long. It was like 2004 or something. And so I remember talking to some of the kids, and there was clearly some things. It was always the Israel Palestine question, right? And this one would always come up. Um, and trying to understand sort of what their take was, because I think the key is always understanding why do you think the way you think. And I'm just gonna out myself here. I'm very much an like, and in college afterwards as well. I also became we were raised in a rather conservative Islamic circle, right? Not conservative. I don't know how you would phrase it. Traditional conservative, however you want to, label it. But the community in general is, you would say, typically we don't talk about LGBTQ, and then most people could probably consider that not Islamic. But as I went to college and being friends with these people who were from the LGBTQ community, and I remember the first way it happened is I was approached at the MU and they're like, "Hey, can you donate?" And I was like, "Oh my god, I feel so bad." It's almost like, when a homeless person comes to you and asks for money, there's no way you can say no, it's just you feel terrible. You've
Yeah.
already been asked, and like if you have the money, why can't you give it? And so, especially within part of our faith, I feel like it's so important to be giving. And so all these things I think put together made me realize I think the common theme for me is always this idea of how do we put different interests and come down to the common ground. You might not always have a common resolution, but there's always some way to talk around so everyone understands where everyone's coming from to some degree, unless you're a psychopath, right? I mean, we always have those. Or a sociopath. I forgot what the definition was. My sister would probably like, no, that's the right one. But, coming around to all this, I went to poli sci partly because I remember the class, the reason why it hit me so hard was because it started introducing these ideas of feminist theory, right? Feminist theory when you apply it to politics, feminist theory when you apply it to, geography or geopolitics, right? And so when you take these different ideas and you realize, oh, I've been trained to think in a very Western centric, Eurocentric method, right? And then you realize there's all these opportunities out there. It's very exciting because this is exactly what we've been talking about our entire
Yeah.
childhood for all of us, right? And so I went to college thinking, because this is my only exposure to politics at the time, there's that one poli sci class. And at the same time, of course, I'd taken a lot of critical theory classes at the same time in my communications major. And so here I was thinking this is the dominant way of thinking. I go to UCSD, and then, I don't know how popular this is going to get.
Dominant
Yeah, the
way.
dominant way of
Okay.
thinking is very like realist or, maybe constructivist, but it's not critical theory. Critical theory, at least when I was going to school anyway, is still very much, and if you look at our politics, it is definitely realist, in the way they
Yeah.
approach defense. It's about, defense of the homeland, and it's about, actors as states as actors and everything else. And so I think after going to school and realizing, oh my God, what I thought was a dominant theory is very much a small subset. And within my class of like less than 200, it was like 130 kids, I think, in that master's program. I could definitely feel I was like one of maybe like 3 kids who were probably of a similar mindset, in that way, and the way we approached it. And the people who wanted to go to the FBI, the people who wanted to go to the CIA, the people who wanted to do Department of State, these are people who I love them as people and I see the goodness, and what they do and things that they're brilliant in. But at the same time, the way they view the world or the way they view other countries and the way they talk about it made me very uncomfortable. Like, I'm not the kind of person where it's like, if there's a challenge, I'll back down. If there's a challenge, I'll always go up against it. But the more I thought about it, the more I was really upset with this idea of if you had to work in the State Department, which is what I was trying to gun for at the time, going into diplomacy, because I thought that, that whole educating people, that whole working with people and finding solutions, this is what I thought diplomacy was all about. I mean, to some degree, it kind of is, but I think in the way our country works at the moment,
It's
right?
debatable, but
I
yeah.
don't know any country that really works outside of it very well. I've sort of, anyway, but the way the whole structure is built, right? That it was just not gonna work the way I envisioned it originally, and so I decided to go the other way, and at the same time, of course, I got married over the first year of my master's degree, and so the second year after graduating, I was like, "Look, I'm one who just fresh out of college. I'm not gonna force my husband to go where I wanna be. I haven't found a job yet." So I went to China where he was. He had, like, a stable situation. So that's how I went to China, and of course, then considering all that, I was like and I know all my friends who went to state, they were all talking about, background checks. If you go live anywhere in the world, they do, a very, very, very close background check wherever you've been. So I was like, you know what? I'm married to a Chinese person. Like I'm moving to China. All this is gonna be like kind of a hassle if I ever wanted to go that direction. So I decided going a different way. And I just so happened to know somebody from my when I was studying abroad in Nanjing. And she was a really great supervisor for me at the time and had a good impression of me. And so I was like, hey, I'm coming back. I'd interned with her the previous summer and I was like, do you have a job open? She was like, yeah, I'll keep it open for you. And when you come back. So I ended up just going straight to work there as a coordinator at the university where I had studied abroad. But yeah, so that's kind of how it went from there, and I ended up in education from that direction.
Nice, nice. That's an interesting pivot from poli sci to and then moving to China to be with your husband, and then that's kind of how you got introduced or reintroduced to education, if you will. I don't want to go down the poli sci route, for this for a particular part of the discussion because I know that could go on for a long time. But there's one thing I do want to mention though, which I think ties in really nicely with what you were saying earlier about you wanting to help people, right? And you also made a very interesting comment about you were saying kind of the way you operate is like, why are you thinking the way you're thinking, or like why, or in a sense, it's like, why are you the way you are, kind of, right? Because the way we think is kind of a reflection of who we are as a people, as a person. So, in terms of greatest impact that we can impart to society, right? Greatest benefit that we can give to to society. We think in terms of like which areas of or which profession do we want to get in that we can, give the greatest impact, right? And so, and I don't want to speak on your behalf, but I would think that, you made that pivot because your level of impact that see yourself being within the poli sci realm or, working for the state or CIA, wherever, whichever capacity would be much less than the current path that you're in right now. Correct, right? Like, if we're thinking in terms of, like, that ratio, your ratio of, impact versus how much time and your service level within education is gonna be a lot different than and a lot greater than if you were to stick with poli sci in the poli sci route. Is that
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. But, I mean, I completely agree with you. I think that was the case for me specifically. I think for one thing, I did not have the background that a lot of the people wanted. I don't think CIA would have ever wanted me. I don't think Department of State would have ever wanted me. I probably would never have passed any of those tests, like, frankly. I was not as brilliant as half of my classmates were. And I think I realized it just wasn't for me. I think my whole thing was that the idea of cultural diplomacy, not actually the way it, maybe runs, but in my head, the way I had always envisioned it. Um, and so I think, I realized after I had done the entire 2-year program, I was like, oh, this is probably not for me, not that particular route. And so that's why I went education. And for me, I think, again, it goes back to that whole idea of if we want to have those conversations, when is the best time to have those conversations? I
Right,
mean, I guess if
right.
you want to talk about brainwashing or whatever, like it happens early, right? Like it's hard to,
It
right?
does, and that's why it's important, like, for to be in the education
Yeah.
space because
Brainwashing. Yeah.
no, I mean, I'm not saying to brainwash anybody,
Right,
right? And
right.
let's not say, let's reframe it and say that like, we want to be in the right position. So like the people, the dreamers, let's put it that way, dreamers are dreaming the right thing, right? Like they're not getting into the wrong spaces and talking to the wrong people, right? And you're preventing the brainwashing if we're, if we're really being serious about that. Uh, but no, and another reason why I brought up the point about like the ratio of impactfulness, right, was also because uh, a lot of people, and I think you might agree with this, a lot of people who stay within the poli sci realm often don't think in terms of impact because of the frameworks that's already in place. Because a lot of it is structured just to keep the status quo, right? You can't really implement so much change within government as an
Yeah,
individual,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
You know what I mean? Like, I mean, yeah, you can dream, right? And one can have big dreams and think, ideas of grandeur, right? In terms of like, hey, I want to do this. I want to, do good for the government, for the people, and for the people we serve. But unfortunately, what often happens, I pray that those who won in their elections and got gone to the office, it doesn't happen to them. They often don't live up to the promises. You know what I mean? Because of the frameworks and structures in place and the powers to be that keep the status quo and keep things in check, right? But anyway, I digress into it, into a different path there. But kind of going back to your journey, right, as a Muslim professional within the education space, what kind of, and I think you touched upon this already, right? But what kind of like discrimination or bias have you encountered, not only workplace but just in general? And how did you handle it? I'm sure everyone handles differently, but curious how did you address those kind of discrimination or bias that you experienced?
yeah. So like, when we first talked about this podcast, I was like, I don't know if I'm a good fit because I worked most of my career in China, and so it's a very different work environment entirely, and really in one city, right? So I guess if we had to talk about, and I'll just put this into like China. And before this, I want to add a caveat. I just no for people who work in poli sci, I highly, highly, um, I can't speak in English today, but I highly admire people who commit to that kind of work. And it's hard for those of us who don't work in it, right? We can't see all the intricacies in there.
Right, we can't see the exactly. Yeah, it's not for the faint of
Right,
heart for sure.
exactly. And I know a lot of my friends who, or not a lot of my friends, but like some of my friends who work in state. And I remember when we attended this one thing where they were talking about if you want to work for state, you have to understand that everything you say is not representative of yourself. You have to consider yourself a representative of the state,
For the
right?
people and the
And so what you
state,
say
yeah,
is the state,
exactly.
you know, um, you know, whatever policy or whatever it is. Uh, and that was like a 15-year ago thing. Anyway, so
Yeah, yeah, good.
sorry, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say you brought up a good point about like what you say is not representative of you, but of the state. And so often that distinction kind of eats at your soul a lot of times because you don't you don't want to believe or say what you have to
Yeah,
say on behalf of the
yeah,
state because internally truly your beliefs and your values are different, right? And especially if you're a Muslim, working for certain states, I'm not going to say names, name names, but you get what
right,
I'm trying to say
right,
here, right? Like, and this is what we'll get into about like the corporate ethics and the accountability piece of it, right? Like, how do we make that balance? How do we put that into practice, right? If you're a Muslim working in for state or in education or whichever capacity you are, how do we make sure we ensure that and at the same time be able to serve the people that we're ultimately serving, and have that trust still intact and in place? So,
definitely
but
a great
we'll
question
get
to
into that.
ask someone who's there. As somebody on the outside, I was like, I know nothing.
I'm gonna say that. I'm gonna say that for another
Exactly.
podcast interview.
Gotta take off this entire thing,
but
Salman. I sound like him.
but no, coming back to you though, Kamla. One of the reasons I brought you here is also to kind of talk about like your experiences in
Yep.
China as well,
Yep.
as it relates to to the students who are coming from out of the country to here to for a better life or better work or whatever the situation demands for. And how do you help them navigate through all the intricacies of personal, professional, different aspects of life, right? So that they can have a better living and future ahead of them, right? So my original question to you was like workplace discrimination, right? And I know for certain the students that you work with, a lot of them, or maybe some of them, have brought that up. Like, okay, what do I do in these scenarios, in these situations? So how do you advise them in like how to handle these certain things as they tread into the different paths or different journeys that they want to tread into? What's your typical way of handling these kind of situations, if you will?
Right. Good question. I'm just also going to preface it. I have a really hard thing with caveats. I think, again, for everybody, there's a specific way you can do it that works best for yourself, right? This is also what we tell like moms and dads, right?
Yes.
When you're a new parent,
Yeah.
every parent and every child is different, and you choose the path that works best for you. Now, what worked for me as somebody who is there's a lot of different identities, right? So, but introverted, let's say, right? And I was raised in kind of like a stereotypical Asian way, in the way that the teacher's always right. You don't argue with the teacher,
Yeah.
even when the teacher's
I
wrong.
mean, it's not Asian. It's almost like every culture,
But
right?
except
It's
maybe, I don't know, white.
except the white.
Whatever, whatever culture it is, no, for me, the thing was always like, authority is a big one. And so when you're considering all that, how do you balance like the correct challenging of authority? Because in Chinese culture, I guess you could say. And so I worked, okay, I gotta keep prefacing this. I worked in China for 10 years, and I worked in a couple of different situations. One where the first 4 years I was working for a female who had experience abroad. She could speak English. Um, and she was probably in her 40s, 50s when I was working for her. She also had a daughter who was the same age as me. And so, it presented us a couple of different dynamics. She had a very kind of conservative way in the way she would deal with maybe certain female employees. For example, when she was hiring for another position, and this was there was going to be a raise involved, right? So I was kind of interested in the position. It was a very small office. There's only so many positions going
Sure,
around.
sure.
And
Yeah,
so
yeah, yeah.
she was like, "Oh, Kemma, but don't you want to have kids? And this position is going to require you to travel a lot." And I was like, "Well, that's a question I have to deal with. You don't have to worry about it. Like, I just want to interview and see if there's a possibility." Eventually, she didn't even let me interview for it because she was basically hinting, "Don't apply for it." And so I didn't apply for it. So that was like, this is not Muslim discrimination to some degree, but this is sort of an
Sure,
example of
sure,
like
sure.
that kind of culture that I was in, right? And but in some ways, she was also very Western. She was like, "Oh, very respectful of the fact that I had dietary changes." And so whenever we went to different restaurants, she'd make sure there was always vegetarian options for me to eat, even though I never asked about it. But I think part of that give and take was because I was sort of the kind of worker where very Asian, right? I put in 125% of my soul into this job. And she sees it, and she's very Asian, so she sees all of it, and she's also female, right? Not that all females will, but she was very meticulous, and she could see how much work I was putting in, and so she gave back by being very, very careful and very, caring of my needs at work. And so this was like it worked out, to pretty much to some degree. We didn't have, and because of the situation in the office that I was working in, there's only like three people of us staffing this office, and so when one was gone, the other person had to be there. And I remember I had a miscarriage during my 4 years there, and it was a very sudden miscarriage. I was suddenly started, just bleeding out in the middle of the workday after like we had like a workplace issue we had to work with. And so she drove me to the hospital. She made sure I took care of everything. And this whole, and then she gave me like an entire 2 months off to recover. And I was like, it's just a miscarriage. Like I had a
Nice.
DNC, so I had already cleaned out. From a very Western mind point, I was like, I can just jump back to work tomorrow. And she goes, no, you gotta lie down, go work from home, but home was a thing. And so
Yeah.
I felt very, cared for in this way. Now, then I moved on to different situations. And the last position I had before I came back to America, I was working in this bilingual school, and it started off with the founder and then the principal slash like superintendent, if you will, or not superintendent, but like head of school and sort of the planner, right? Ended up, she was from the U.S. slash Canada, whatever, same thing, right?
Okay.
And
Yeah.
so, so her mindset is very much, Western in the sense of, we deal with things in a very like, US centric kind of way, the way we deal with the workplace.
Timely
Right,
fashion, I
yeah.
guess we could put
And
it.
also very
Yeah.
respectful of like, we're very familiar with diversity, DEI kind of policies and everything. And so she was very like, people would ask me, "Oh my God, do they let you wear hijab at work?" Because in China, hijab is considered like you shouldn't be wearing it, especially if you go further east. Like if you're in the further west of China where there's large Muslim populations, you probably would wear hijab wherever you go. But if you're in any kind of state level, like country, a national level, like position, whether you're a government worker or you're working in a school, because these are all public, right? Or a university, you're technically not allowed to wear hijab because you're supposed to be abiding by the state policy of non-religion.
Because you're public facing, so the more public facing you
I
are,
think
the
France,
the
right?
less.
I'm not sure that's a good analogy at this point, but
Yeah, but yeah.
But anyway, so moving on. And then my friends would be like, "Oh my God, they let you wear the hijab at school." And they're like, "Oh, maybe it's because it's a private school." And I was like, "Well, no, that's not it." But, because prior to that job, I actually had interviewed for a manager position for like a what do you call it? Like a daycare center in like near my house. And they wanted me and they were like, "Oh, you should come apply because you're American, you have all this like this background or whatever. We'd love for you to be the manager of our next opening center." But then as we were discussing, he was like, "Oh, before we do the interview though," and I talked to the board of directors, "you need to, take your scarf off if you want to take this position." And I was like, "No way in hell, there's no way in hell I'm taking my scarf off." And
Yeah. Right,
so
right.
I just dropped the position. So things like that, and then I had lots of friends too who were like they would wear a scarf maybe through their college years, and then as they graduated and started taking jobs, they would have to take it off because they just couldn't wear it to work. And it was never something that they even dared to bring to the table to ask about. So, and if one of them would wear the scarf to the interview, they either, didn't get the job, or the person would be like, "Oh, we want you for your skills, but you need to take that off," basically. And they would comply because, what are you going to do? There's nothing
Right.
you can file a lawsuit against, like that's not discrimination in that sense for Chinese companies. And so, going from that sort of cultural context, I was like, "Oh, I'm really lucky." And then my director sort of moved on, and then the person who replaced her, that there was a new principal. There's a million principals in our school, but one of the principals was like a super traditional guy from like I think it was Gansu, maybe it was Xinjiang, I can't remember. I think it was Gansu, and so like a Western province, but
Okay.
not Muslim. And he was super traditional in the sense of like if you watch CCTV and you watch how those like Chinese like leadership talk, that's how
Yeah,
he
yeah.
talks. He
Yeah, yeah.
literally sounds like he's on broadcast constantly
Really?
with his chest puffed up and he's just walking around school. And if you're nobody, like if you're not his vice principal, why the hell would he be talking to you, basically? And so I've always been like a very like sort of laid back kind of style. I'm not very much like I'm gonna be dressed up in my suit and I'm not gonna be talking really formally. I sort of, you know, whatever. And so it wasn't his style. And so I remember one time we had this one thing where he was asking for a certain like everyone had to wear a certain clothing, but there was an issue with that because there were students from different parts of the school and this part of the school wasn't supposed to be wearing that clothing. And so I was trying to relay this to them from our international side of the department, and he was like on the local side of the of the school. And I directly just messaged him. I sent a bunch of voice notes. They were all read. He didn't reply. And for 3 days, I saw him around school and he'd avoid my eyes, and I was like, "What the heck is going on?" And then later on, his fake secretary, it wasn't even like a real secretary position. She ended up being like, "You can't talk to them. Wait, let me handle it." And so she fed it so that he thought it was his own idea. Anyway, so this is kind of the stuff that we're dealing with. And I totally forgot why I'm here. I'm becoming my mom, I'm sorry. But in terms of like workplace bias, I guess it's like sorry, talking about the different types of leadership. So I think with
Yeah,
different
yeah.
types of leadership and your particular type of personality at the time you are is really important. For me, I think like my style is I'm gonna prove to you how good I am at my job, and then you have nothing to say about it. And at that point, like I'm not gonna necessarily make asks because I know a lot of kids, like especially Gen Zers nowadays, they just come straight out with the ask, right? Which I think I'm like, I applaud you because you have the bravery to do that. For me, I'm kind of an old school style where it's like I'm gonna prove to you that I'm good, right? And that I'm worth it
Yeah.
or whatever. And then when I make an ask, you don't feel like I'm making an ask out of nowhere. You feel like there's a rapport built between us. There's some sort of trust and you believe in me or you like me, right? Or you want me to grow. And so as a result, when I make this ask, you're like, "Hey, I want to help her. I want to make this happen for her."
Yeah.
So like that relationship I had with my first boss, relationship I had with other bosses, but not that one.
No, that's an important distinction that you just made. That's very an interesting observation because I'm sure you see this all the time in your current capacity at your workplace. But like, uh, young professionals these days, they almost know their value straight, and they know their worth even before they officially start the work that they're interviewing for. Whereas myself and maybe yourself, like in the we're always in that mode of like always trying to prove something to somebody and like earn our respect, earn that respect for that job from that person, even though they never asked for it in the first place, or let's say you got the job, right? And you earn your way and this is your job, but you always feel like that imposter syndrome kicking in, right? And I feel like a lot of the young professionals these days, they don't have that, right? And I'm, don't know why that is, right? Like, how one generation to the next, right? The whole imposter syndrome just kind of went away. I don't know how that happened. And so that leads me to the next question about like, when you're choosing to decide your next opportunity, right? Or your like whether it's a lucrative opportunity or something that you've always wanted, right? That particular position or that job, in that company. And whether or not it conflicts with your values, right? And you touch upon this, right, with your story with of the hijab. What are the decision making, like you know, uh, what are the decisions that you make, right? What's that decision making journey look like to you, and then subsequently to those who you advise, right? Because I know you'll say this, it's subjective to the person that you're advising or whoever is making the decision, but there comes a point where it's like if you're advising a Muslim, right? Some of the advice is going to be the same, like don't take the hijab off if they ask you to, all right? Or no matter how lucrative the opportunity is, right? Stick to your values, right? Be proud of who you are. Be proud of being Muslim. Be proud of the heritage and the deen that you're following, right? But also, I know, and this is sadly a fact and a sad reality is that a lot of people do give up some of their values in order to put food on the
Yeah.
table,
Yeah.
right? And unfortunately, I know a few individuals who decided to take up their hijab for the purpose of getting a better job, better working conditions, or better future for their family and whatnot. So I don't know if how we want to go about that, but like my question to you is like to the young professionals these days who want to stick to their values and be proud of who they are as a Muslim or even non-Muslim, right? What's your advice to them to that decision making part of the journey? You have to choose A or B or C or D to ensure a better future.
Yeah. Starting again with my preface as usual. So, I was just gonna say, well, a couple
Yeah.
of things first. Like, I realized I never closed the loop on this one, but I was like, I am pro LGBTQ. I'm also like, for people who choose to unhijab or whatever the term is these days, or unscarf or descarf or anything else, my choice to not take my scarf off is a personal one entirely. For people who choose to take it off, whether it's for an opportunity because you're seeing as, being stereotyped against, I completely understand. And even if you want to do it just because you don't agree with it anymore, I think I fully support all of these decisions because everyone's relationship with God is very different. Hijab is not, for me, in my opinion, it's not a symbol of how religious you are. It's certainly not a symbol of how spiritual you are. And it has a very different meaning depending on where in the world you are and what time you lived in or who your family is, right? And so unhijabbing to me is, it's such a complex story for everybody. So no judgment whatsoever because it's right.
Sure, right. It's a deeply personal
Exactly.
choice
And
too,
and to
right?
that and to answer that too, when we're talking about, like, if you're taking it off because you're systemically getting stereotyped against, is that your fault, to some degree? Is it? Like, it's,
You're
but
right, right.
obviously for me, like I said, my grandpa was somebody who was very much a political commentator his entire life, and he got jailed for it when he was in Singapore, and that's why he ended up in the US because he sought political asylum. But I always joke around to my family, I'm like, in the same generation, I would have been one of those people who like shouted my values at the world and got killed for it because I'm the kind of person that's like, for me, if I have to be very honest, I don't know that I wear hijab necessarily for a spiritual reason anymore. I think I wear it purely politically. For me, I wear hijab because I feel like I'm trying to create more opportunities for other people to get an understanding of Islam. So whenever anyone approaches me, even if they seem hostile, if they're insulting me or whatever else, or even just asking a question because they're curious but they don't know how to ask it, and I say whatever, I don't care. Like, I'm happy to have a conversation if you want to have that conversation, right? Because I'm not trying to convert anybody. I just want to make sure you have a line to talk to somebody about something you never had exposure to. And so for me, wearing hijab is like, well, here I am. If you want to talk about it, sure. I'm happy to share what I know or what I've heard. I'm not, the all representative, but I can be a line for you to create that first understanding, right? And I forgot why I brought this up again.
Yep. Is in relation to like choosing, the next
Oh, yeah,
opportunity,
yeah.
right? The next,
And
yeah,
and so, like, sorry, so after those prefaces, between choosing the opportunity and values, I think for me, even especially as a family, and this is an article, this is completely like non-religious related, but I remember reading an article recently, I think it was the Atlantic or something. Somebody's gonna tell me it's not. But it was something about how family raising, family building is tied intricately to capitalism. And it's unfortunate because like everything we do, right, is it's entirely about can I pay for daycare? Do I have to choose between a job or staying at home watching my
Yeah.
kids? Like all these different questions, they're intricately tied to the system that we have built, right? And so if you make that choice to make more money because you need it for your family, again, like, I don't know, is it the system that's at fault or is it you? And as you as a person, when you choose to make that choice to walk away from the decision, of course, I highly applaud and I admire it. I also completely understand. And, I might even choose the same thing if I were to have to choose between feeding my family and, with Snap EBT being gone for 4 weeks. Like, seriously, like, like, how am I supposed to? And so I understand if people make those choices. People who choose to remain at, maybe Microsoft, all the tech companies, right? Any of the defense companies, like defense companies, honestly, I'm like a little bit like, really? But, like I can understand those decisions and I'm not here to judge. For me, I would always ask, well, you have to weigh your choices, right? And you have to figure out those
Yeah.
benefits for yourself and what means more to you at this time and whether it's a short term thing. And if you're there, then what do you do to make sure that you do your piece, right? What conversations can you open? And for me, I understand, like for most of us, like you work as an employee, let's say at Microsoft, and you try to protest, you're probably just, you maybe you get terminated or something like that. Maybe it's
Yeah.
protesting. Maybe for other people, the style is like for my style is I'm not the loud protester type. I'm the kind of person where I insidiously, if you will, I brainwash people very slowly. Like I try to, what I do is
You play the slow
right,
game.
it's I
Okay.
play the slow game. And so I'm all about like, let's talk. Whenever we talk about the topic, I bring up my ideas. And this is just my point of view. And then I want to hear your ideas. And I want to sort of like have those conversations long term because I think that's what like oftentimes I remember I had this conversation in grad school too with when BLM was happening. And one of my white friends,
Mm.
very I love this love this friend so much. But he had brought up, he was like, "Well, don't you think like the protests are violent?" And this is going to be a really really controversial statement, right? But he was like, "Don't you feel like protests are too violent or like the way they're doing it is really conflict focused sort of thing?" And of course I was mad. I was piping mad hearing that because I was like, can you like do you not understand the context of this whole history? But as I was talking to him, I think what he was trying to say, and this reminds me of the recent conversations about like boys too recently, but like what he was trying to say was, I think sometimes when we want to engage in conversation, if you come straight at somebody and say you're racist, the first thing they do is shut down, right? They don't listen to logic anymore. They're not engaging. They're just like, I'm not a racist. And so all they'll
It's an
yeah,
emotional
emotional
response.
response. And
Yeah.
so they're not engaging, right? And so it depends on obviously what you're trying to do. And obviously, to be honest, like we said, change and revolution has never happened because of a conversation or because of like, hey, let's talk. But it's and so again, I think there's a need. This is, I remember, I think during our history classes, again, back to high school, I remember something that we talked about was we can sort of make those comparisons between Malcolm X and like Martin Luther King Jr. or Gandhi or, whoever else. And there was these always like, now looking back, they're like nonviolent protest worked. I was like, well, there's no counterfactual to say that it wasn't the violent stuff that pushed
Sure.
the tick on certain things. Not to say this is really terrible. Like the caveat here again is not condoning, but
It's not violence for the sake of
right.
violence, but it's to send a message, right? Like,
Yeah.
like there's only so much that diplomacy can do,
Well, my
right? You
question
can
is, if the
talk.
people in power don't listen to me kindly asking you to listen, what do I need to do to make you hear me, right? And how do I get you to and
Right,
it's again back to
exactly.
Palestine again too, right? Like, do I have to scream and shout? Is that the only way you'll listen? And maybe you'll not listen, but at least somebody, it might turn the point on something, right? What do I have to do if I ask nicely to be sitting at the table to talk to you about it and you still don't pretend to listen if you listen, right? And then you do nothing
Right.
with it. What do you want me to do? So it's anyway. Sorry, we've sort of strayed from the topic.
No, no, no. That, and I'll promise this will come back to the original point that we're making about like, decision making and, choosing a career path that really aligns with the values because, the decisions that you make are a reflection of who you are as a person, right? And what you do as a professional, right? And trying to represent not only yourself but your community, right? And like the people that you love and appreciate, and you have a certain connection with, right? And one point I do want to make in what you were saying about the purpose behind protesting and doing what needs to be done to be able to live a life, right? There's a reason why people resist, right? Like the whole premise of resistance is because the other party is not listening to your
There's no
demands.
path to
No,
airing your grievances.
right? Like, at what point do you do if their vision is only to, I'm just gonna say, if their vision, if the person, the other person, the opposition, if their vision is only to kill you, right, is to unalive you, okay, you have to defend yourself, right? Like you have to prevent that action from happening, right? However that looks like, right? And this can be debated for a
Oh
long
yeah.
time, right? As you know. But going back to the premise of our discussion here is about like trying to make a living for yourself in the way that is the least harmful to anybody involved, right? Well, and that includes you and anybody else who's around you, and the people you're trying to serve, right? You want to make sure there's the least harm done to society as a whole. Some people don't think that way, but those who are sound of mind, that's their objective, right? And that's the mission, right? So to speak. So, what everyone has a responsibility to do to ensure that mission is achieved is to make the decisions that would be beneficial not only to you, but you have a responsibility for all of society, right? So if that means you have to let go of your position at Lockheed Martin to make a statement and say, I will not support and work for a company that's directly complicit in genocide, and you have that privilege, you have to, you're like, this is almost like going to Akida and fiqh. Like you have, it's like forced upon you, right, to take that action if you have that privilege. You know what I mean? And someone said like, in a previous interview, if you don't have that privilege, don't like forsake your own health and wealth and well-being of your family and yourself to make that statement, because that's counterintuitive to the whole message that you're trying to, you know what I mean? But if you do have that privilege, if you do have the opportunity, then you are obligated to make that stance, right? And also going back to your comment about you wearing hijab as a political statement, right? You're just trying to invite people to have a conversation with you so you can do the dawah, so to speak, right? And have that conversation and say, hey, these are my values. I invite you to have a conversation with me so we can live a better life and make the world a better place to live, right? And playing that slow game of like, brainwashing, the other party, which is we're not saying we're brainwashing anyone, but like again, the premise of it, the purpose of it all is to make sure that like let's all live happily on the world that we share together, right? Like we don't we don't need to shed blood or hurt anyone just to do whatever we want. Like you can do all of that. I mean, you can live life without shedding any blood, right? So harming anybody in any way, shape, or form. Anyway, not to go on a huge tangent from there, but going back to full circle about like, making ethical decisions, right? Whether you're at school, your work, at home, right? There's a framework to be followed, right? And that framework is different from everybody for everybody, but it seems like you have a framework. And I think you already kind of mentioned it, but for those who didn't really clearly understand, can you define what that framework is if you have it defined,
I did not come prepared.
or I guess like what it should look like? Yeah, I'll put it that way.
I mean, again, I should have prepared a little better for this. I think framework wise, again, like you have to list your own priorities. Is it like faith values in your mind that are most important, and then prioritizing, right? And to some degree, like we go back to like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Like you've got to take care of your family first. Make sure you have enough money. So go from there, and then just sort of make your value marks or your decisions based off of
Right.
that.
Right.
So for me, like it's fairly direct, I guess. Anything for me that I consider my Islamic values, they're pretty high up there. But thankfully, I don't have to make that many really ethical decisions at work. I think most of the time it's uh, most of the time it's like, should I tell them the truth and they'll be really upset about it, or should I just tell them the final solution and then avoid letting them get really angry about it? Like that kind of stuff.
Right.
And
Right. Right.
so that's more of the ethical stuff to deal with, really, for the most part. There are a couple things that happened, I think, that like I feel like, okay, I would not have done this personally, and I understand why as an institution they have decision for this. At the same time, I feel like it's a temporary thing, and so I can kind of understand why as an institution it's happening. But I will do on the
You're right.
personal side, like if somebody else has a need and they're not getting it met, I'm going to make sure I try with my personal resources to make sure that their needs are met. But yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. Mm. And yeah, like you mentioned before, right? That everyone's circumstance is different, right? And so the way you approach, decision making for your career will have to be, adjusted, according to, was it the Maslow hierarchy of needs, right? Um, so that no, that's good. I love this conversation, and it's going into many different directions. But to keep it on track here, uh, talking about you, if you have any advice for any young professionals who are either about to graduate or who have just entered the the the, the workspace, right, the industries, um, I guess what are your you know if you have top two advices for them, right, in terms of like finding the next best opportunity, what would that advice look like?
There's just 2 things before I go off on a rant as usual, which is networking and then trust building. So something I keep telling our international students is oftentimes they start job hunting when they need a job, which makes sense logically. But I think a lot of the things that we don't realize is how important that relationship is, especially when you're trying to stand out in a sea of resumes and where people are using ATS to go cut through the first round or whatever else. And so I
Sure.
think
Yeah.
something that I've mentioned a lot to the kids is they come to an event and then they try to run to the speaker and they'd be like, "Give me a job. I need a job. Like, I heard you have an opening or whatever." And it's like it's kind of aggressive. Um,
Guilty. Guilty.
come on, someone.
Hey, I don't know what I was doing. I admit, right? I was like new to the whole thing, but again, I've learned my lesson. So
But I think that's the thing, like, I mean, it works depending on the way you did it, who you're talking to, the situation, right? There's a whole lot of context going on here. But the way I tell my
right,
kids
right,
always is like, if it was me, and I'm somebody who wants everyone to have a job, right? Like, most people want other people to have jobs. And so, because I care deeply about my kids, I hope that they all get jobs. For me, I always like to, I don't, there's two things I want to do, right? I don't want to recommend somebody that I don't think makes sense. And I also, if I recommend somebody, I want to know to some degree what they've done. And I want to have some sense of confidence in what is successful that they've done before. So
sure,
in
yeah,
that sense, right? So when you're talking to people, you never know. And I also talk about this like in marriage too. I was like, you don't know who you're talking to that will lead you to your final destination, right? Or your layover or whatever, right? Like so you're when you're talking to people and like going to these events, always be your best self, right? Always bring, I mean, as much as you can, and bring what you do to the
yeah, yeah,
table well. Like if you're volunteering, that's why I tell my kids, like especially the international students, so like, why should I volunteer for something that doesn't pay me and for a student club? And I was like, because that's how you build trust. That's how you build like your reputation. And that's how you build things that you can rely on for someone to vouch for you and say, this person does what they say they'll do, right? And they do it well, and they'll pick up for other people's mistakes. Or if they make a mistake, they'll do this, right? Like this is how you build that trust, that value system that other people can view. And so for people who are coming new to the job, if you haven't looked for a job or if you're trying to get a job soon, I mean, I would always say volunteer as much as you can and do your best at those volunteer jobs. You never know what turns into an opportunity. And you never know, for example, maybe you're working at St. Vincent de Paul and then somebody, was watching, who's also volunteering with you, like, hey, that person really put in the effort, put in the extra time or whatever else. They have this, in your mind as you guys have random conversations. And then next time they're like, hey, I saw this job. You mentioned that you were doing this. You want to try this or who knows? Like you never know
yeah,
how this opportunity
yeah,
for me, like throughout my entire small little 10-year career trajectory, it's always been referrals. Like my first internship is
mhm,
because I was there as a student and the program director liked my work ethic as a student. And I was the same age as her daughter, who was a high schooler, right? And so she could see me as a high schooler doing things with 24-year-olds, 26-year-olds. And she was like, this person's very responsible and knew how to bridge the gap between cultural values, right? Like between the Chinese and American values. And then that branched into an internship, which branched into a full time opportunity for 4 years. And then after that, like I remember even when I was in college, I would be a student at a class. And then because they were like, oh, this person, they do their homework on time when they present, or whatever, they do what they say they will do. And so they offered me an opportunity to do like program coordinating for another thing. And these all built up to help me lead into those opportunities that I eventually got. When I did my like EUCC thing as well, it was because I was friends with the program coordinator over at the other center, and then his wife was doing something, so he was like, "Hey, my friend over here knows how to do this, and she studied poli sci or whatever." So she's like, "Oh, hey, Kamla, do you want to do this?" And so this is all stuff that just sort of like because of me knowing other people, and then them recognizing to some degree my abilities, right, or my
right,
responsibilities. So when I tell these kids, it's like you don't have to do things assuming a goal in mind. You know your value, but you have to you have to some degree, be able to show that value to other people. How you might be telling the truth. Somebody else might be lying through their teeth about how much, they're doing or what they're good at, right? So
Sure.
how do you stand out to somebody to show that I'm actually somebody you want? Build that trust relationship and that network of people. So yeah, that's sort of what I would say.
No, that's good. And I'm curious, as someone who's an introvert, right? I'm a mix of introvert and extrovert, like, or
The
I
cusp.
should say, I'm extroverted what I need to
Yeah,
be,
yeah.
right? But I guess I'm sure we can go on a different tangent with the whole extrovert introvert and how you measure that. But my question to you is, as an introvert, what's the best way to go about networking and coming out of that bubble so that you can, do what needs to be done for the whole job search hunt thing?
And again, defining introverts as somebody who like expends energy to socialize, right? Like it takes a lot of energy to talk to people.
Yes. Yeah.
For me, I think the key is I hate like what we call in Chinese like hanshen, just talking about the weather or talking about like random stuff. I like to like I'll start with
Small
I hate
talk.
yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I can't remember what it's called. Lived in China too long. And so like I hate small talk. And so for me, I'm like, I just skip it. Hey, what's your name? Okay, what's your age? I'm like, what are you doing? Whatever. Okay, and now that's over. And then I'll be like, so, why'd you do this?
Now
Yeah.
get to the meat of the
Exactly,
conversation.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so I think sometimes I come across as really creepy or maybe like, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. Like I think sometimes like I was going to my kids' Chinese school and I wasn't trying to be friends with anybody, but I was just like, "Oh, there's a parent in front of me," and she was like watching her kids and I just went like, "Oh, hey, how are you? Is that your child?" And then I think I started getting into the other questions like, "Oh, so how long have they been here?" And then she looked at me funny and I was like, "I'm creeping her out." So, but that kind of stuff is like the why, right? Like, so when you talk to
Yeah. Yeah.
somebody or
Yeah.
if you go to like a networking session or you're just sitting next to somebody in class or whatever, trying to talk during class, but like, asking the why questions, those are always more interesting. People love talking about themselves, right? And that's the best way
Yeah.
to start getting to know each other without being a creep. Yeah.
Key part without being a creep.
Google that.
Yeah, right. No, this has been a great discussion, Hamza. Thanks so much. So before we wrap up, I want to make sure that for those who want to be able to reach out to you, connect with you, either and potentially, you could be their mentor. What's the best way to reach out to you?
Email or WhatsApp. I use WhatsApp more often nowadays. So yeah, I think those are
Okay.
pretty good.
Okay. Sounds good. And then as a call to action, right? What's one concrete action that our listeners, so the viewers, can take away from this conversation to be more intentional about accountability at the professional level and even the personal level?
I think prioritizing your value system. So yeah.
Okay.
Did I answer that?
And when he's well, you did, but I want to add a little bit more. Like, so when you say prioritizing your value system, is that like in terms of like a thought process? Like, is it a thought activity or like, to actually write it down and like, try to map it out and see like how does that look like in terms of
I think it depends on everybody, but I think you have to have a very like active choice to decide why am I making this decision. Don't go with gut feeling, right? I mean, the gut feeling tends to be right?
sure.
But when you're making decisions, to think about why am I making this decision? What are the factors that are helping me decide on whether or not I'm taking this opportunity or not, or making this decision or not?
Gotcha. And this can be applied to anywhere in life, right? Not just, your career search or, wherever you want to work, but, finding your next life partner or like,
That was tricky. That
finding
was
a
really
house.
tricky. I'm gonna tell you that's 50-50 logic and like fate.
Right.
Yeah.
A little bit of luck
There's
involved
a,
too,
there's a
right?
lot of there's a lot of God planning in there.
Right. But no, that's a great advice, and inshallah, I think a lot of people will resonate with your advices and what we talked about, and again, I wanted to thank you so much for sharing your journey with us today, myself included. There's so many people will want to take inspiration from what you're saying and apply it to their journeys and path, inshallah. So, with that, jazakallah khair. Thanks so much, and to our listeners and viewers, we'll see you again next time, inshallah.
Inshallah. Walaikum salam. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Tread Path podcast. You can find all the resources our guests mentioned in the Tread Path archive in our website, coffeeproductions.com, along with the links to connect with our guest speakers. If today's conversation inspired you or helped you in your own professional journey, we'd love to hear from you. So please leave us a review, share the episode with someone who might benefit, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. May your treaded path be blessed and full of wisdom. Assalamu alaikum.